Hello and welcome back to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Brian.
And this is the
Bible Bistro.
Which I've already said.
It's episode 88, episode
86.
86.
And you've entitled this one a song. We talked about this.
Well, you want, yeah.
Do you not want to say?
No, that's fine. It's a working. I'm not good at titling things. This is a working title.
Okay, this is a working title. But Brian gave me some notes, and the note is titled "To Hell with the Devil,"
which is a song by
Stryper.
See, here's what I'm gonna say. We've had people suggest us, even as recently as last night. We've had people suggest us we should do. And we mentioned this last episode too. We should do an episode on contemporary Christian music. Problem is, for me, contemporary Christian music is like the 1980s, right? So, like, yes. I referenced Keith Green a few weeks back, and then I just mentioned Stryper today.
Stryper, and we listened to a little bit of Stryper and the song "To Hell with the Devil," and
you're not a fan.
Well, nope, no, sir, I'm not.
You know, the first Christian metal band to go platinum, though. I mean, you got to say something about that. I don't know what you got to say, but you got to say something.
You got to say something. It was a different time.
That's the classic era of contemporary Christian music. That's
I have
back
to
in the
say,
day.
well, I want you to know how I know about Stryper. Is my sister, who is 10 years older than me, and she's a listener. She'll be doing this. When she was in the high school ministry, they put up the Stryper emblem album cover painted on the high school room at our church.
Right.
And they wrote their names on it the year they graduated. And then at some point, it was deemed inappropriate and it got painted over.
Oh, well, you talked about us doing an episode where we were dressed to Stryper.
Well, that's a lot of spandex. Had a lot of hair. Anyway.
More than I have, so.
More spandex than you
More
have?
hair.
Oh, yeah. We can get wigs. This is all wigs and costumes, my friend.
It was a balding joke.
Anyway, so
we're here at the bistro again at the movable feast, which is this.
What are you trying to say? We had lunch? Is that what you're trying to say?
I was going to get there. So, and we're enjoying some nice beverages from Crafted. This is a chai tea, which is very good,
and this is an Americano, and it is also super good.
Yeah,
super good. But we had a great lunch at a Mexican joint here.
Kind of, yeah, Mexican-ish.
Can't you just say it's a Mexican joint?
It's kind of Tex-Mex.
My gosh. I can't believe we're still doing this.
It's created by a person in Central Illinois. Anyway, enough of that.
We went to lunch. We sat in silence. Didn't speak to each other. And now we're back. And now it's time to talk.
We are.
Yes. All right. So we're talking about, it's not just a catchy title, To Hell with the Devil. We're actually going to talk about
the devil. So
yes, take us down this wonderful, uplifting path as we prepare for Thanksgiving.
Well, so we're actually, in the world of podcasts, we just now as we're recording this, we just finished up the week of Halloween. So
yes,
but here's kind of what I was thinking about. This came up from a discussion. Well, it was actually it wasn't really a discussion. It was an aside that I made during Sunday school a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. We were talking about the fall. We were talking about Genesis chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about the serpent in the garden tempting Eve. And then I just said, hey, when do you think Satan fell? And somebody said, I immediately know, it had to be, before this. I'm like, well, why do you think so? And we have from time to time on the bistro proposed various interpretations that are somewhat different than what we typically think of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good thing for us to be aware of, I think, and to examine kind of our presuppositions and these kind of things. Because this person immediately said, Satan fell from heaven. The scriptures say so. And I said, well, where does it say that? And of course I knew, and this is for, shout out to anybody. I don't think there's maybe only one person in our Sunday school that listens to this. So shout out to Diane,
yeah, Diane.
But I kind of asked the question so people would kind of go back and look and think about it some and that kind of thing. And so, one of the things I was thinking about is we have to constantly ask ourselves how we come to the conclusions that we hold.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking a little bit last night. We had some discussion just about epistemology, and that's the idea of the study of how we know things, or how do we know what we know.
Right. The thing, if we say we know something, what is the
Right.
criteria by which we can hold on to and say we know something?
Right, because there are things that sometimes come to us and we don't not even sure of it. So anyway, I did this kind of offhanded comment, and then a couple of days ago, I had someone else from the class come and say to me, "Well, I know I've read that someplace," and so I realized that which is good, to kind of get people to question and think about it. But epistemology, and someday we should talk just about that idea itself. But how do we know what we know? Or we might say, how do we know what we hold to be true is true? Something like that. Because, we've talked about, I've used the term social imaginaries in here, and we've talked about this idea. There are things, sometimes we pick up ideas culturally that come to us in different ways. And that's why I think the other thing is it's important to be a little bit familiar with the history of the interpretation of the Bible. And I'm going to I think I'm going to show an example here when it comes to thinking about who Satan is and those kind of things. I think this may be one of those days that we get some pretty weird things handed down to us that may not be completely accurate. Here's an example, though, of how culturally things kind of come to us in this. Well, I was trying to think about this earlier. What was that game? It was a game show for a while, and there was a game, a board game you could do it. It's kind of like charades, except you draw like on a whiteboard.
Like win, lose, or draw.
Win, lose, or draw. That's the game I was thinking about. So if I said to you, the devil, like, and you were trying to get somebody to guess that, how would you do that on win, lose, or draw?
Well, I'd have the pitchport, of course, and then the tail with the little arrow.
Probably horns and this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And all of those. So again, if we drew that, somebody, oh, that's the devil. We just, like I said, in real time, we just passed Halloween. Somebody could have dressed up with red horns and a tail and all this kind of stuff. And so, that I immediately know what you're referring to. But that image that comes to us isn't a biblical image. It's a cultural thing that we have inherited, right? It's a shorthand way to think about this kind of being. And so I think it's important for us to kind of think about where we come to these kind of conclusions. So anyway, the first passage I thought we would look at, and let's start with Jesus, because, I try to listen to what Jesus says and as best as I can do what he tells us to do, that kind of thing. But here's one of these places. So this person said to me, well, I know I've read this someplace. This is where I think they're referring to. Luke chapter 10, verse 18. I think I had you hold that for us. Go ahead and read that.
Yeah. He replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. You want me to keep going?
No, that's fine. That's Jesus' response. Now, it's always important to think about context, right? So what is the context of this? What's just happened when Jesus makes that? It's kind of a strange statement, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens just before this?
Well, it looks like Jesus sends out the 72.
Okay. So you remember he sent out the 12 first and gave them instructions about teaching about the kingdom of heaven. Later on, there are 72 that are set apart, of his followers that are set apart to go out into all the villages of Galilee and to share the news of the kingdom. He gives them very specific instructions. They come back then, and this is the even more immediate context. What happens when they come back?
They returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name.
Okay. So they're coming back and reporting to Jesus what has happened. And they're kind of, I think they're kind of amazed. It's like, wow, this is, we knew that, we believed in you, we trusted you, but it's amazing. Even the demons, even the these evil spirits, and we'll come back maybe and talk about that a little bit, but even the demons have listened to us. And then Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. What's that a reference to? What's going on there? Within the context, how would you take that? Just if you had no other information, how would you take that?
Like Satan's defeat, or Satan. Yeah, that Jesus was there when he saw Satan.
Oh, you're saying back in the beginning?
Yeah,
from the
or is it maybe it's a metaphor like of his defeat, like these demons are being cast out.
I'm saying just from the context that I've given you so far. Mm-hmm. I think that we have this idea that the demons are obeying, but basically I think the immediate context, whether we understand this from a deeper background or not, the immediate context is that the gospel is the preaching of the kingdom of God, which is what the 72 have been involved with, is bringing about the defeat of the evil one.
Bringing him down.
Okay. So that's, again, that's immediate context. We obviously have to go back, and we have, we always have to think about, what comes before this and that kind of thing. Some people think this may be a reference to Isaiah 14:12. And the first person that brought up this issue in my Sunday school class, I'm pretty sure it was Isaiah 14 that they were thinking about. So do you have Isaiah 14:12 there?
I will pull up Isaiah 14:12. Oh, I'm one page off here. Hold on. Isaiah 14:12. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations.
Now, if you look at this entire context of chapter 14, what Isaiah is doing is he's using, I think, figurative language here to talk about this one who was the king, who was basically the king of an empire, king of Babylon. And he had, the whole story here of Isaiah is kind of like the king of Babylon is coming. Because of our disobedience, he's going to capture this nation. But then there's going to come a time where Babylon receives its defeat. And part of the issue is always about it's going to be because of their pride. Okay. Now, here's you might read that and you say, well, where's the devil in that, right? Well, you didn't grow up with the King James at all, did you?
No.
Okay. My first Bible is a King James Bible. Here's what it says in the King James Version of Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. And so look at your version, NIV.
Okay.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Okay. Now, what does it say in the NIV there?
How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn.
So the word morning star, or the phrase morning star, is translated, that's how it's translated today. In the King James, it was translated as Lucifer. Now, where does that word Lucifer come from? That word appears one time in the King James Version, and that's where it appears, Isaiah 14:12. It's a Latin word.
Really?
Yes. So the word Ifer, the last part of that word, Ifer, means bearer. So the name Christopher, for example, is bearer of Christ. I bear Christ. So Christopher. Lucifer, the word lux in Latin means light. This is the light bearer. Okay. So now you might say, well, Latin, what in the world? Old Testament, Isaiah was originally written in Hebrew. This word is Halil. In something like that in Hebrew. I'd have to look it up. Only time in the entire Old Testament that this Hebrew word is used. Okay. And that word means, it's usually used for the planet Venus, the morning star. Okay. It is in the Greek, in the Septuagint, it has this idea of the morning star, but when there's a guy, have you ever heard of Latin Vulgate? This is where it gets a little bit messy. Okay.
That's the Latin translation of the Bible.
So the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek, but then by the time of the 3rd century or so, as it spreads, as Christianity spreads across the Roman Empire, most people, who can read Hebrew, right? And even then, Latin is the common language. And so even the idea of Vulgate, now Vulgate's a later word we attach to this, but it means this was the common tongue, right? The vulgar, right? This was the common language. And so Jerome is the guy who began this translation in the late 4th century, somewhere around 380, 382, something like that. He began to translate the Bible into Latin so that people could use it. And he translated this idea of the light bearer, or this idea of Venus, with the word, the Latin word, bearer of light, Lucifer. In the Latin Vulgate, that word occurs 3 times. Okay. It occurs here. It occurs in Job. And it occurs in 2 Peter. Go ahead and read this for us. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. It's Job 11:17 if you're playing along at home. But it also is in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. That word Lucifer in the Latin Vulgate occurs 3 times.
Okay. Oh gosh.
2 Peter. Sorry.
I know where it's at, but
I know
the Bible pages aren't.
For you.
Here we go. 2 Peter 1:19. We also have the prophetic message as something completely reliable. Is this what?
Yeah, go ahead.
And you will do well to pay attention to it as to a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises.
The morning star
rises in your hearts.
Okay, morning star is the planet Venus. Because of the way Venus is in relation to us in the solar system. I know this is getting kind of astrophysics for us, but because of that, Venus is actually the evening star and the morning star. It's the first thing that we see rise in the east before the sun comes up. And so it's kind of harbinger of the
so
day.
It's considered the morning star.
It's the light bringer, right? It comes first, and then the sun comes after that. Now, when the King James translation was translated, there are these 3 times in the Latin Vulgate where this idea of Lucifer occurs. And in that particular context, in Isaiah chapter 14, they chose, instead of translating it, they chose instead to make it a proper name.
Interesting.
And that's where the word Lucifer enters into English.
That's a great little story.
Now, you go, but here's the thing. I mean, again, we have to go back and think about where's this idea come from, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is that even talking about the devil? Let's use the term right now. Mm-hmm. Right. But now we use the term, if I use the term Lucifer or Satan capitalized or the devil capitalized, we would use those more or less interchangeably. Right. Mm-hmm. But that's the only place that occurs. And it's because of a choice in English to make it a proper name of a Latin translation of a Hebrew word of a Hebrew word that occurs only one time in the entire Hebrew Bible.
But then got applied through the translation into English 3 times.
So here's the problem.
Have we not highlighted the problem?
It's not really, because here's the problem. That proper name then kind of takes on a life of its own. And in popular literature, Dante's Inferno, and then ultimately in English speaking, Milton's Paradise Lost, which has a lot of simpatico with Dante's Inferno. Lucifer becomes a character. And in fact, I've mentioned this before in Paradise Lost, Lucifer really is kind of the hero. He's a tragic hero, right? Mm-hmm. I would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And so he becomes this kind of tragic figure. And that's where a lot of our conception, I've said this before and people don't believe me, but our popular conception of the devil is a lot based on Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, here's what we try to do, or here's what we were raised in churches that wanted to really say, let's look at the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about titles. I'm going to use the word titles instead of proper names to talk about this, right? So if we're talking about this character, this evil one, however you want to refer to this, to him, or however you want to think about that, the words that we commonly use are not proper names at all. Lucifer, it's just a word for morning star, right? Venus, the planet Venus is what that meant. The light bearer, right? And so in the Old Testament, I'm trying to think how to ask this. So the word that is commonly used the word that is used is Satan, right? Mm-hmm. Satan is that's where we get the English word Satan. This comes from the Hebrew Satan. And I'll just ask you this question. We have 39 books in the Old Testament. How many of those books do you think have the word Satan in them? As a proper noun? Oh, as the word Satan.
How many books?
Of the 39 we have of the Old Testament, how many books do you think mention Satan?
2.
Wow. You took a really low estimate there. It's actually 3.
Okay.
So where do you think the first one is mentioned?
Genesis.
Never mentioned in Genesis. So what are the 2 books you think is mentioned? Job for sure.
Okay, Job for sure.
And in fact, 2 chapters of Job chapters 1 and 2. The majority of the uses of the Satan in the Old Testament is in the book of Job, those 2 chapters.
So Job, and then I'm going to go with a prophecy. Mm-hmm. A prophecy book.
Yeah.
I'm going to say either Ezekiel or Daniel?
Those are great guesses. Both of them are wrong.
Oh, don't tell me they're great guesses if they're wrong.
Zechariah is the prophetic book. We'll look at that in a minute. And the other place is one time in First Chronicles. Okay, let me see. I got the reference here someplace. First Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1. You read that, and I'll go to the Zechariah passage. First Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1. And that's kind of a weird use. And it's an interesting story. A lot of people have lots of questions about the story. Like, well, I do too. But
21:1. My Bible is like, hey, you know those pages you want? I'm just going to stick together. Oh my gosh.
Okay, here's
you read yours.
Here's Zechariah. This is Zechariah chapter 3. The word is used twice here. Then he showed me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right side to accuse him, which is an interesting word. We'll come back to that. Satan standing at his right side to accuse him. The Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you. Satan, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem, rebuke you. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? So twice there we find Satan in Zechariah. We find him several times in Job chapter 1 and 2. And then finally,
this is First Chronicles 21:1. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. That's wily Satan.
Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing
Apples
about this.
and censuses.
In every one of these uses, and again, he's never mentioned in Genesis, and we'll come back to that because there's something else we have to look at in the book of Revelation. So I'm not done yet. Don't start yelling at your listening device yet. But every time that we find this word Satan used in the Old Testament, it's used with the proper with the
capital S.
No, with the article, Satan. Okay. Now we saw it there in NIV. They made it into a proper name, and we use capital S, proper name, but it's the Satan, which literally means the opposer or the adversary. That's what Satan means, the adversary, the opponent. And so there's lots of questions here, and I'm just going to mention this one, not because I think it's true, but there are some. So you think about this, Job, right? In that passage in First Chronicles 21, and then in Zechariah, there are people who seem to understand that the role that this title, and again, that's this person or the character, the Satan, the adversary, that the role that adversary has is almost on God's behalf to become a questioner. Now, again, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
And I'll show you why in just a little bit. But it's not, the word's not used very often in the Old Testament. Now, the New Testament's used more often. We have examples. I have some that I pull up here. So Mark chapter 3 is one example where Satan is used. Again, it's a Hebrew word that then we find being taken into the New Testament. So do you have that passage? I didn't.
3:23.
Yeah.
Yep. So Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan?
So this is where Jesus is being accused of doing these things by the power of Satan, and how can Satan drive out Satan is his idea. This is the parable of the seed. You might remember in verse 15, he says, some people are like seed. This is chapter 4, verse 15 in Mark. Some people like seed along the path. When the word is sown, as soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word as is sown in them. Luke 13 is another example. Do you have that one?
I can.
Okay.
13:16. Here we go. It is, then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? So
Satan in the New Testament, when Jesus is using it, we find warnings about Satan in other places. He seems to have this kind of character of the one who's opposed to the work of God, right? Now, I'm going to mention this intertestamental book. Yeah, I know. I get in trouble. This is not a divinely inspired book, but it's called the Book of Jubilees, and there's a lot of people who make a lot of big deals about this. So we've talked about this before. In the book of Genesis, there's all kinds of questions that we're left with. In fact, a couple of episodes ago, this is what we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
That Genesis was not designed to ask the kind of question, or it was not answering the kind of questions that we have.
Mhm.
So we have questions like, well, where did Cain and Abel get their wives, or where did Cain get his wife, and things like, well, who are everybody. When everybody
Nephilim, the Nephilim.
Exactly. I was going to say the first question I get, oh, you're a Bible college professor. Who are the Nephilim? Who are those giants and what's going on in Genesis 6? I'm like, I don't know. But there's all kinds of questions we have. In fact, the other day, somebody was talking and I said, the Bible doesn't tell us how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before they took of the fruit, before the serpent tempted them. By the way, notice the word Satan.
It's a serpent.
Is not used in Genesis 3. He's called the serpent. Now, again, we're not done yet, but that temptation, how long did it take? Well, Jubilees tells us 7 years is what Jubilees tells us. So Jubilees is kind of a commentary. It's 50 chapters long. It's kind of a commentary written on the book of Genesis. It follows more or less the outline of the book of Genesis and the beginning of the book of Exodus, and kind of answers all those curious questions that we have. Now, in the book of Jubilees, we have this character that appears in these same places. And I just gave you this one example from the book of Jubilees. This is chapter 17. And this character that seems to have the same role as Satan in the Old Testament does to Abraham something similar that we see in Job chapter 1. Happening. So let me read this. This is Jubilees 17, 16 through 18. And the prince Mastema came and said before God. That's the character. So here's this prince coming and saying to God, behold, Abraham loves Isaac his son, and he delights in him above all things else. Bid him offer him as a burnt offering on the altar. So you see, very similar to Satan coming to God and saying about Job, well, look, consider your servant Job,
Right.
He's a righteous man, but he's done all these things. And so basically he says, tempt him by having him offer him as a burnt sacrifice. Will he give up? Will he really give up Abraham? So the book of Jubilees and some other intertestamental literature kind of has, and by the way, book of Jubilees, there are tons of copies of this that are in, I say tons, I think a dozen copies of this in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was a very important book to that community. So there are certain Jewish people in the intertestamental period, so that time before the coming of Jesus, for whom this became very important. And so when Jesus in the New Testament uses this term Satan, it seems to be more in keeping with the development that took place there that makes him into this adversarial kind of character.
Okay.
So questions or comments on that?
Well, no.
Not yet?
Not yet. Not yet, but we're getting there.
Okay. Well, let's talk about another title then that is a New Testament title. It's not used in the Old Testament at all.
Okay.
The devil. Okay. The word is diabolos. And so you can see where we kind of get our word devil from that, the Greek word diabolos. The interesting thing about the word diabolos, so in the Old Testament, that Zechariah passage where it says Satan, that accuser, the word diabolos means the accuser. That's what that word means.
Okay.
The balos part is to throw, and the dia is to throw against. So it's kind of like accusing someone. You're throwing accusations against them, right? That's kind of the idea that it has. And so devil is used. So for example, beginning of the Gospels, almost all of them talk about, well, three of them anyway, talk about the synoptics, talk about Jesus being tempted by the devil. Okay. Again, notice a title, not a proper name. His name's not devil. It's the devil, the accuser. Another example, Matthew 25, that I've talked about here is talking about the end of the world. Basically, is what Jesus is talking about here in this context. And in verse 41, he says this. He says, then he will say to those who left, depart from me, you are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil. the accuser, and his angels. Okay. So this character, again, these titles, the devil, and in the rest of the New Testament, I should say, we have these things like James saying, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Or 1 John 3 talking about the devil who was a liar from the beginning and the children of the devil. And Jesus refers John chapter 8 to the children of the devil. So we have this diabolos, the accuser, being used frequently in the New Testament then. So far we have this idea of Lucifer. And what we've kind of done, we kind of put these together, right?
Yeah. We've taken something that was, we've created a very specific person out of
character. And again, I want to say that's a cultural construct as much as it is a biblical one. Okay. Now, I do want to look at Revelation 12, which we've talked about before. This is the passage about the dragon. Revelation chapter 12. And there's a really interesting passage, and this is a passage that helps me interpret. But the problem is, this is the book of Revelation.
Right.
We're getting toward the end of the story now, right? And it's going to kind of bring some things together for us. But what do you have the passage there?
I've got
Go ahead and read that
12,
for us.
7 through 9, right?
Yeah.
Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought.
Okay, let's stop there for just a minute. Michael, who again, he's mentioned in the intertestamental literature as well.
Yeah, he's a big angel.
So here's this Michael, and go ahead.
And his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him.
Okay. So what is the context of this passage? What do we have just before this?
This is like the whole story of Jesus,
right?
It's the dragon and a woman coming, and gives birth to a son, a male child who will rule the nations with iron scepter. And then the dragon tried, her child was snatched up to God.
And protected from the dragon.
And then the woman fled into the wilderness.
But now it's interesting here. John, again, inspired by the Holy Spirit, refers to the dragon, that ancient serpent, which probably is a reference, I think, back to the garden. Who is called
the devil, or
Diabolos, or Hasatanas, right? The accuser, or the adversary.
So in this, now my NIV has a capital S, Satan. Is it the Satan?
It's the Satan,
or the Satan who leads the whole
devil,
world.
the Satan, Hasatanas. So here's this. So there's where it brings it together, right? In a way, it's talking about that.
Ties all these labels together into one. Yeah.
But then it says there's a war in heaven and he's cast down. So here goes my question initially that started this whole thing. When did Satan fall?
After Jesus' resurrection.
I'm not saying that. You said it. Here's the interesting thing about this is I really don't know the answer. I can tell you the possibilities. I'll tell you the possibilities here in a minute. I don't know the answer to this. Very seldom do we do a podcast thing on something that I don't know the answer to. Right?
Well, guys, this is it for the Bible Bistro.
Been on last episode.
We'll have something we won't know. We'll be able to talk about next week.
So here are the possibilities. One is there are some people who would believe before creation, and I don't even know how to think about that, but before creation, Satan fell. And that's probably culturally, would you say that that's what you would have believed coming in here? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, I mean, I'll be honest though, like when does he fall? And I guess it depends on what you mean by the fall.
Well, when does he rebel against God? Or,
right. Well, I mean, I think we have to say if he's repelling against God, though. I mean, isn't he rebelling against God in the temptation? But you're saying in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, you're saying it was like a tool.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's some people who think that. I don't necessarily. I don't think it's true. I don't think that's true. But there, I want to offer that.
I guess for me, how I've always thought about it is it had to happen prior to the garden. So because we already see this adversarial spirit that is taking place. He's trying
in Genesis 3.
In Genesis 3.
So, and I would say that's probably the most common understanding. Here's the problem with that. And I don't have any problem with that overall, but I want to make sure we understand that the devil is a created being.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's where I think we get into trouble, is this, again, weird ideas. Some of them are coming from non-canonical books about, somehow Jesus and Satan being equal. You'll hear people,
brothers, they're brothers,
right? And this kind of stuff. No,
that's nonsense.
No, he is a created being. Mm-hmm. So again, did it happen before creation? Well, not before the creation of the,
because he's a created being. It had to be in the creation and when again, all the angels were created.
I don't think there's enough information for us to. This is why I say I don't know. I don't think there's enough information for us to say exactly. Now, what you said, and if you made me guess, I would say it's what you said, which is that in the act of tempting Adam and Eve, this was the serpent who, according to the book of Revelation, again, the end of the story is equated with the accuser, the adversary, that in this act of encouraging Adam and Eve to do that, which is encouraging rebellion against the Creator, that in that act, this is an act of rebellion on his part as well, and maybe, quote unquote, the fall, however we understand that. Okay, so that's one possibility. Another is, there's some people who would say, again, if you take Revelation seriously, let's go back to Luke first. Is it in the preaching of the gospel? Is this when we find Satan, being cast down in the act of the preaching of the gospel? That's what Jesus says. I saw Satan falling like heaven. Now, he uses past tense, but and then we have in Revelation, it seems like after Jesus. So again, I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say it has to do with the temptation itself. I don't know that we have enough information biblically to say for certain. Let me kind of summarize, because I know I've kind of gotten into some deep water here.
It's all good.
But here's what I think is important. Oh, and there's one other passage in Revelation I meant to read earlier, and so you got it.
I've got it here.
Well, let me say this first. The big thing I want us to get across is, again, how did I start with this? There are many things that we have accepted just as the way things are because we've accepted them culturally, and they aren't necessarily biblical, right? So that's what I'm saying. Let's look at what the Bible says about these things. Now, we can think, and I said history of interpretation. In fact, I guess technically history of translation when it comes to this idea of the Latin. What I do know is the Bible doesn't seem to have any concept of the devil's name being Lucifer.
Or horns, or a tail with
none of that. I don't think I don't think that's what Luke. I don't think that's what Isaiah 14 is referring to at all. Unless some people say that's what Jesus is referring back to, but I don't know. It's a complex picture, and I don't know that we have enough information to. I know for a fact we don't have enough information to build this kind of character that we have. This kind of caricature, I would almost say. Which again, I think has as much to do with John Milton and medieval artwork.
Oh yeah.
As it, I haven't even talked about paintings and stuff.
There's plenty of paintings about it. Yeah.
Cloven hooves and all this kind of stuff.
Unclean. Well, that's what
But anyway, that's all I was going to say. So yeah, read this other Revelation passage, which talks about the dragon.
Yeah, this is chapter 12, 13 through 17. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a times and a half time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus.
So we have this dragon hurled down and then this ongoing work against it. And again, Revelation we've talked about before.
Imagery.
This is the imagery of the work of the evil one, which I think is a real thing. I'm not trying to deny that. Jesus warns us about. We haven't even talked about the title, the evil one. Probably should talk about that as well. But Jesus will use this phrase, the evil one, to refer to this one who's an adversary, an accuser. So all I'm saying is this is I think that a lot of our idea about this character as an amalgam, it's the same thing that we've talked about with the Antichrist.
Yeah.
You know, this figure never mentioned, you know, when I say to somebody, oh, where do you find Antichrist mentioned? And they'll say, oh, Revelation. Nope, never in there. And they've taken several different passages, kind of put them together, and they come out with this figure, man of sin, the Antichrist, all these other passages, and come up with something that's not necessarily supported biblically. So now, again, I don't want to deny that the force of evil, you know, Paul makes us clear, forces of evil is real and at work in, you know, in accusing and being an adversary to God's people. What we see there in Revelation, I think, is a very real idea. But I just don't know that we can build these kind of things unless we're going to use things like the Book of Jubilees and First Enoch. You know, I don't think we can build these kind of elaborate ideas about exactly how things happen.
So what do we do with this, Brian? We've just had To Hell with the Devil episode.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, we've got these weird caricatures and Lucifer's not in there.
Right.
Like, what do we do with, I mean, is there something for us to do with it?
I think here's my main, and I'll go back. I've kind of said this, but I'll just be very clear. I said this at the very beginning of the episode. We need to question where our ideas of these things come from. Again, a lot of people, I think the people in my Sunday school class reacted, you know, say, oh, we know what the answer to that, and have a great deal of confidence, but it's as much to do with what has been handed down. And again, from Milton. Milton's not an inspired author of scripture.
What about Dante?
Well, no. But you get what I'm saying? We've had this idea of this artwork and all this culturally. I've mentioned before, when I would teach Book of Revelation, I would always have people do an assignment where they would take some kind of cultural artifact, a movie or a song or something like that, that relates to the Book of Revelation, either very explicitly or very implicitly, and then critique it based on what they learned in the class. And again, many of our ideas, I think, come from more cultural osmosis than they do from a deep study of Scripture. So here's what I think we do. This is why I'm constantly saying we really need to be students of the Word. We really need to be getting into Scripture. I mean, I think many people would be surprised if you said to them, you know, well, Satan is mentioned in 3 books of the Old Testament, once in 1 Chronicles 21 in that weird account, which I need to get somebody on to explain that to me because I don't really know what it means. Zechariah 3 in 2 verses, and then Job chapters 1 and 2. If you tell most people that in the Old Testament that's the only times we find Satan mentioned, I think they'd be surprised by that. You know, now you came much closer than I think most people would have, but you know, most people say, oh, Genesis, you know, and when you tell them, well, Satan is never mentioned, you know, the title is never used. And again, when you start thinking about what does the word even mean, it becomes very confusing. You know, and I think, you know, just again, being a student, asking the questions, kind of getting below the surface of just, you know, this is why it's important. It's not just something that we can, even just a quote unquote surface reading. Like you said, the NIV capitalizes these, you know, it's a proper name. Well, is it or is it not? You know, that's kind of the questions I think we have to ask. So that's what I would say is the takeaway.
Blue Letter Bible for that.
There you go. That helps. Yeah. Or Logos or some other.
I mean, and that's the thing is, you know, you talk about so what and being a student of the Word. I think that's one of the things, at least from this podcast, I've appreciated, you know, like that we've sat down and looked at some of these things, even as we've done in recent episodes, like the plural you know, like some of the issues there, or some of the things that we have brought and things I have brought to it. I will always remember our episode from John about
John 14,
my father's house.
And I was thinking about that one. I'm glad you brought that up. John 14, my father's house. Again, we assume that this is what it means without looking at the good evidence for it.
Yeah, and I think it's so hard. I mean, again, this is a book we've been reading talking about the social imaginary, which is basically the thoughts that we just have in our heads and the water we swim in. It's so hard to step out of that, but it's a work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I think that's the thing that I've taken away from all of this is it's like, it's work, and we've got to do the work. Otherwise we will be only shaped by what culture has told us to think about this.
And that's an ever changing target. Right. and you can even see examples of that. Maybe that's the other thing. And again, the epistemology thing, I think, is an important key to it. But, you know, in my lifetime, you're much younger than I am. But, you know, the changing mores, again, you know, either right and wrong, truth and error comes from above, revealed by God, or it is an ever shifting decision based on, you know, our you know, from below, our decisions of culture.
And there's no middle ground on that.
No.
It's either above or it's below.
From below. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, well, Brian, thanks so much. Yeah. So this was your wonderful Thanksgiving podcast listen. As you're driving to family, you can thank the Lord that you've learned more about the devil or the Satan, the accuser. So don't call anyone at the dinner table that. Because now you know it's just the title. So anyway, next week we'll be starting Advent
series. Yeah, it's that time of year.
Yeah, so if you're preaching through that, you know, you just got to wait for our podcast, then you have stuff to preach through for the Advent series. Anyway, we'll be doing a series on Advent leading up to the
end of season 2.
End of season 2.
Yeah, leading the birth of Jesus, and then the end of season 2.
Yes, the birth of our Lord, and then the end of season 2, and then we will start. What's next after that, Brian?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe season 3.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless we're canceled by the network.
Unless we're canceled by the network. But season 7 is the complete one, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the fullness of everything.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brian, thanks so much.
Yeah.
And we'll jump
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And we'll jump into Advent next week.
All right.
Yeah. See you.